Welcome everybody. We'll make a start. As I've already said, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you join us from around the world. We do have a truly international audience with us today, and thank you very much for joining us on what for many of you is perhaps the last thing, the last push before the summer holidays are upon us. So great to have everybody with us. And seeing lots of friends, familiar faces, but also great to make some new friends and meet some new people along the way as well. So this is the fourth webinar in a series that are proudly brought to you by SVI, Social Value International, and the Efiko.Academy. And they've all really brought some absolutely fantastic people together, some real thought leaders, some fantastic experts who are fundamentally helping us take some of these great ideas, translate these fantastic rhetorical ideas, or turning the rhetoric into a reality. And for those of you that haven't heard me say this, I say this a lot: if not now, when? And bringing such people together is exactly that, really. It's helping us all understand how to do so much of what is needed. We all have such great intentions. So bringing these people together, as you say, sharing their experiences and providing us with some solutions. So as well as being challenging and thought-provoking, we hope that our speakers today can help us with some solutions. And today we're going to speak specifically about the financing for the Sustainable Development Goals. And some of us, we were talking just before we kicked off, and I'm going to go a little bit off script because the SDG Progress Report for 2021 has recently come out. And I think this is a really great quote for us to begin things with. And this is from the Secretary General of the United Nations. And they say that the SDGs are more important now than ever. Now is the time to secure the well-being of people, economies, societies, and our planet. They say it far more eloquently than I do when I say, if not now, when? But we have this dramatic shift that is required, and we see some fantastic movements towards that end. We see the ideas of impact investing, responsible investing, and the use of thinking around SDGs being mainstream. But the question remains, is this a reality? Are we doing things to the scale that we need, at the pace that is required? So although there's lots of positive movement, is this really happening? So the question for today is how to make genuine progress. How can we all think about what we're doing, change what we're doing, and how can investors, how can enterprises of all kinds make the progress that is required towards the SDGs? I'm pretty sure that everybody joining us today would agree that the SDGs are something we need to achieve. And what we have today are two fantastic speakers who can provide us with some of the mechanisms to make that a reality. So I join you from Social Value International. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Adam, the Director of Impact. And SVI is a network of networks, a movement of movements, a collaborator that brings together different organizations, members, and networks. And we collectively want to change the way the world and society account for value, taking account of a broader definition of value so that decisions really do listen to and act on the effects that people and the planet experience. And by doing so, we can make some positive movements towards increasing levels of equality, improving people's well-being, and working towards more environmental sustainability and justice. Have a look at our website. It's currently under redevelopment. It will be out hot off the press at the beginning of August. And I would definitely recommend you have a look at our professional development pathway. And we are working in a proud partnership with the Efiko.Academy. The Efiko.Academy is an organization that has a genuineness, a real integrity to make impact the new norm, to provide training and support to people, and provide it in a way that is incredibly accessible, so that regardless of where people are based, regardless of the sector they are in, they can access training materials that are also very relevant to them. And again, please do have a look at the website. It really does bring together a great cohort of learners and a great cohort of experts and practitioners from around the world, and we can all work together on this journey of better impact management and realizing the need and the potential to be the impact professionals that the world needs, again, if not now, when. So proudly bringing together in partnership, fourth in this series of webinars. And there are some tough acts to follow, Priscilla and Belissa, I'm sure you're well aware. We've had some great conversations with impact investors, with standard setters, with founders of global movements, and somebody that even subsequently became the mayor of Liverpool. And I like to think that Efiko and SVI can take some of the credit for that, perhaps. But without further ado, we turn to our fantastic speakers today. And it really is a genuine privilege to be able to introduce Priscilla and Belissa. I'm sure you're going to have a really positive experience from these guys. We'll have a conversation, the three of us. I'll ask some hopefully challenging questions, but please do put your questions into chat. There will be an opportunity towards the end of the session today to ask your questions out loud as well. And I really do encourage you to do that. You've got some great people to speak with. You have Priscilla from the OECD. Priscilla leads on the work on the impact of private finance for sustainable development. And I know that Priscilla works incredibly hard supporting governments so that they are able to maximize the impact of their sustainable investments using ideas around blended finance. I've known Priscilla for a number of years, and I know her from a previous role with EVPA, where she was the Research and Policy Director. So it's fantastic to have you with us, Priscilla. And I know this is pretty much the last thing you do before your holidays. So thank you, genuinely. And Belissa. Belissa is the Impact Measurement and Management Advisor for the UNDP's SDG Impact. And just some fantastic work coming out of both organizations. If you haven't yet looked at the impact standards, what have you been doing with your life? Please do have a look at those. They are absolutely pushing the boundaries. So Belissa brings a wealth of experience from international development and supporting organizations of all kinds, impact investors, foundations, development banks, and so on. Really working to professionalize their approach to impact measurement and management. So two amazing speakers that we have with us today. So let's turn to some conversation. As I say, again, I will keep stressing this. Do send your questions in. We will absolutely have time for you to ask questions to Belissa and Priscilla. But to begin with, given that we've seen the 2021 progress report is out, I don't know whether if anybody's read this, maybe this is too easy a question to begin with. But what is the current situation in terms of our ability to meet these global goals in the 8 and a bit years left that we have? And what are the effects of the global pandemic that we still experience? I'm going to ask that question to both of you, but perhaps I'll turn to Belissa first as you're unmuted.
Thank you, Adam, and I'm very happy to be here today. Good morning, good afternoon to everybody. So we were talking before, as Adam mentioned, and basically, the latest reports on the achievement of the SDGs and the progress we're making, they're not super encouraging. Basically, the COVID-19 has really exacerbated the challenge we face in terms of achieving the SDGs. We talked about the sixer effect, which means basically very simply that the needs are increasing, but the financing is getting reduced. So in terms of numbers, and the OECD did a great report on that. So Priscilla, I'm sure she can share more than me and more details, but basically there was a gap pre-COVID estimated about $2.5 trillion in terms of gap to achieve the SDGs, and that has increased in 70%, and now we're at $4.2 trillion, and that is really, I mean, huge, right? However, there are some good news in the sense that the global finance market is about $379 trillion, and really filling this gap is only 1.1% of that amount. So I think that's good news, because it's not that we don't have the money. as we say. It's just really about how we channel those resources towards the SDGs. There are many challenges in terms of how to do that. And basically, I think when I was reflecting on the challenges, one important conclusion is really to think about a systems approach. This is really a systems problem where there are so many actors and variables affecting how we allocate our investments, how we do business, that it really requires a partnership. And again, I look back to Priscilla because it's really about public and private sector partnerships. And we talk a lot about that, but what does it mean, right? So it goes beyond regulation, it goes beyond just standards. It's a coherent set of policies and tools to really get there, right? That we're going to discuss in a few minutes. One thing that is really related to my work that I would like to comment is that not only there is a gap, but also what is aligned today to the SDGs. I mean, there is not still demonstration of the impact that we are achieving. So it's like a black box. There is a lot of risk of greenwashing, ESG washing, impact washing. So we really need to do an effort in terms of not only aligned resources, but also demonstrating results. So that's something that we're going to discuss in a minute, right? But at the macro level, that's the picture. So as Adam said, the time for action is now. It's a matter of scale. It's a matter of moving at the pace the planet needs it, but also it's a matter of being more effective in how we do it, right? So I really like two questions that I learned when I joined, the Inter-American Development Bank years ago in the evaluation office. There were two key questions. Are we doing the right things? And then are we doing things right? And Priscilla and I and Adam today, we're going to share some tools to try to answer those questions, but I think it's really important to look at those fronts. And I'm going to leave it there, Adam, for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Priscilla, are we doing the right things and are we doing it right?
Thanks. Well, that's a very good question. No, I just to answer your question. And first of all, thank you so much for the invitation. It's really great to be here and have a chance to discuss this with this audience and with Belissa and all of you. So, well, I think, what Belissa covered, it's everything there is basically to say. That we have an SDG financing gap that it's increasing. And the incredible thing is that despite the efforts that many governments did until now to mobilize additional resources for the SDGs, the scissor that Belissa painted is not being closed in any way. And it's quite interesting because finally, I think today, and I work on development, but you can really see this happen everywhere in the world, even at micro level, companies are increasingly understanding that SDGs or non-SDGs and investors as well, that the issue of sustainability in the broader sense of making sure that what we do is not detrimental to people and the planet, but it's actually positively contributing to people and the planet. It's not something high level for policymakers, but it's something that is really important for everyone, for every single investor, for every single company. So it's true that we have this huge looming financing gap at the OECD, at least in our financing for sustainable development division. We look at the issue in terms of mobilizing the resources, aligning them with the SDGs, and making sure that they are achieving a sustainable development impact and that we are capable of demonstrating that impact. And I really think that this issue has been developed, the way of thinking has been developed for donors and for governments, but it's now really clear to everyone that even if the SDGs might seem very abstract and even if the indicators that we're using might seem very far away from what businesses and investors are used to, we can't forget, we can't pretend we don't know they exist. We can't pretend that we don't know that these global challenges are there. And we are increasingly seeing that these global challenges are not just an issue of developing countries, because they are also very clear in our own countries. I live in Paris. It's been raining non-stop for 72 hours in July. So this is just a simple example to say that these issues are real and they are present and that's there for everyone. And it's true that the pandemic has exacerbated issues in terms of augmenting the scissor, but the only thing we can actually do now It's to mobilize all those resources that come from organizations that have gained during the pandemic and move them towards these sustainable development goals, or more generally to sustainable development objectives. So I think the interesting thing today is that this macro level that was starting to care about this issue back in 2015 with the SDGs, the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, and so on and so forth, and the micro level are somehow coming closer. And we'll talk about it later, but I think what we can all do in terms of standard sectors and organizations working on this issue is try to work together to align the way in which we look at these issues to help all actors from micro to meso to macro level to work together in a more systematic way and in a more coherent way. Because otherwise, if we don't start mobilizing, aligning, and measuring the impact of our resources in a coherent way, I don't think we can move forward.
Thank you. Yeah, and both of you touch on some of the key issues that we're going to continue to discuss today. Priscilla, a second question for yourself then. So what can be done? We've got the gaps. So what can be done to A, increase the levels of financing for the SDGs, but also B, make the investments that we do have and the activities that we do have more impactful? I mean, from my perspective, we talk about the gap in financing and completely accept that, but are we really, let's say, sweating the investments that we do have? Perhaps if we were maximizing some of those, the gap wouldn't be so significant, but that's my perspective. So how do we mobilize more capital and how do we make it even more effective? To you, Priscilla.
I'm not sure I have the final answer. I'll try to give you my answer looking at how we look at the issue. And Belisa, of course, feel free to come in and complement whatever I'll say. But I think, in terms of making sure that more resources are targeted towards the SDGs, at the OECD, at least, we work a lot on this concept of blended finance. So basically, we try to see how we can use development finance, whether it comes from public or private resources, to mobilize commercial finance for the SDGs. And so we try to help donors in terms of governments, but also foundations and other providers of development capital think about how they can reduce the risks that are associated with investing in developing countries, especially for these commercial investors. And this is a way to look at the issue. So there is definitely an issue of risk of finding projects that are sort of at the level of risk that is acceptable for institutional investors and other providers of commercial capital. So that's one way of looking at this issue of trying to mobilize more resources for the SDGs. And I think that's been working. It's not yet working at scale. So that's something that we are also trying to look into, because of course there is this risk mitigation piece that it's very important. But then there is also another big piece, which is around the incentives that these investors and then of course also companies have to push more of their finances towards the SDGs. And for me, incentives, it's really a big piece. And there are, of course, the internal incentives, which can be around risk mitigation and all of these issues. But there are also there is also a big set of incentives that needs to come from shareholders. And in the case, for example, of development finance institutions, donors are shareholders of DFIs. So it really comes from them to push DFIs to take more risk and invest more resources and leverage more resources in developing countries. But then incentives can also, of course, come from regulation. And I think we've seen a lot of developments at the European level in terms of ESG disclosure regulation, but also corporate disclosure regulation and other regulations that push investors and companies to be more transparent about the way in which they use their resources to achieve the SDGs. So that's also maybe something that can really help make our existing resources work more for the SDGs. And I think the work we are doing with the standards, the OECD UNDP standards, and also the other UNDP standards for impact, it's really trying to help organizations internally rethink about the ways in which they operate, so that this issue of impact is not just something that is additional or just an add-on that you plug in, but it's something that really permeates the culture of the organization. And this really, in a way, for me, it's a big game changer, because we are trying to move from this idea of SDGs and impact being something you measure only, that you have a set of indicators and that you report on those indicators, to a way of looking at it in the sense of the real management. How do you change your strategy, management process, transparency, operations, and governance in a way that makes the organization being completely permeated by this issue? And this links back to the incentives, because at the end of the day, the different people working in these organizations really need to be incentivized to think about impact, to consider the positive and potentially the negative, of course, impact they're generating as an integral part of all the decision making, from where they set the strategy to where they choose the company to invest in, to where they decide whether to go into a certain product line or not. And this is really, again, something that changes the mindsets and the way in which people operate. I don't know, Belissa, if you want to add something to this from your experience with the non-development, let's say, standard.
Priscilla, it was really excellent. So I think I'm gonna hire you and ask you to come with me to explain the SDG Impact Standards, because it was fantastic. So on that, really, as Priscilla said, it's really about a new way of doing business, a new way of investing. But what is that new way? A way that integrates impact considerations into decision-making and practices. So when a CEO, that's how I like to think of it, thinks of its profits, its quarterly revenue, our dream is he's going to, or she is going to think about, okay, what about my impact, environmental, social, at the same level? It's going to be as important. And that's how he's going to run, or she's going to run the business or the investment. So that will be my only comment. And maybe the other interesting thing that we have at the UN with the SDG Impact team is, you remember that we said, are we doing the right things? Are we doing them right? So the strategy part really asks leaders, investors and enterprises to look at areas where they can maximize their contribution to the SDGs, to sustainable development. So that responds a little bit, are we doing the right things? And we have a product called SDG Investor Maps that look at each country in terms of prioritizing the SDGs, because not all the SDGs are equally important depending on the context, right? For example, Europe, Germany is having this problem of flooding. California is having a problem of water scarcity and drought, right? So there are different challenges that are more or less important depending on the country or the region. So we have that product called SDG Investor Maps, and I'm going to put the link because we have a platform that's going to show you how it works. It identifies areas where you can have both impacts and financial return at the same time. So that's really interesting. So that would, in my mind, respond to the questions, are we doing the right things? And then are we doing them right is really about the standards that we're working on together with OECD and we have available in the website. That's all. Thank you, Priscilla.
Thank you, both of you. Belissa, I'd like to take that a bit further forwards. And, you talk about a dream. I share that dream, where social and environmental impacts are seen as being as material as financial impacts. That's the way, and you use that language, of maximizing our impacts. And for a while now, a lot of us have been talking about, the convergence, seeing increasing mainstreaming of lots of approaches. And, we're forever dealing with the alphabet soup that we're all part of. So as much as I would like and believe that there's lots of convergence and consensus emerging, there are still some important differences, some significant differences perhaps between different approaches to impact measurement and management. So in your opinion, what are your opinions on the different approaches? I'm not asking you to sort of single out, A, B, and C, but are they all genuinely focused and able to deliver sustainable development? And I'm going to be honest with the audience today. We spoke about this and we said, do we need to call out the emperor's new clothes at times, perhaps? Belissa.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. Yes, this is a great question. And Priscilla, be ready because I look forward to hear your comments too on this. Yeah, basically, I think there is convergence, but of different things, right? There's no consensus, I would say, not even about what is sustainability. Okay, what's the right ESG approach? What is impact? And there is more and more interest, and it's really an alphabet soup. So to me, the first thing to ask in any meeting or any standard or any taxonomy is, okay, how are you defining sustainability? What do you mean by impact, if impact is mentioned? And I'm saying that because there are very different approaches on how to respond to that question. And I'm just going to try to summarize it in a simple way. There is one, for example, ESG approach and sustainability approach, because it's called sustainability, that really focus on enterprise value. So it's really about measuring the degree to which a company's financial value is at risk given environmental, social, and governance considerations. So again, it's really about risk management, right? So today, environment and social issues and governance pose a risk for organizations, and that risk can affect the organization's financial value. So that approach is called enterprise value, financial materiality, that's another terminology. And it's really about considering ESG in the, as long as, or in the way it affects the enterprise value. And that's called also sustainability. So that's, and there's consensus, all organizations, standard setters that really prioritize that, they're getting together to align, which is good and it's positive. On the other hand, there are other organizations and standard setters like the OECD and UNDP that were really worried about value creation or double materiality, which is we care, we see organizations as drivers not only of profit, financial profit, economic, but also responsible for environmental and social impacts. Okay, whether these are positive or negative. Therefore, the approach is we need to know what those impacts are. And we ideally would like to have a positive contributions to sustainable development. So those are very different, very, very different approaches, but sometimes they're called sustainability. They use the term ESG and even the term impact. So I would just say that to be very cautious about it, because we're using similar terms sometimes for very different things. And so that's one very important consideration. As I said, I think it's obvious. The UN, and I work there because I believe in this, and we work in partnership with OECD, with SBI. We really believe that financial materiality only is not going to move the needle. It's not enough. It's more of the same, right? I studied finance in my other life, and as part of my risk management course, I would have looked at E and S, environmental and social, just because of financial value. That's completely different business that really seeking to contribute positively to sustainable development and the SDGs. So we need to be very careful. ESG ratings today mostly focus on financial materiality, and this is why you're going to see. And if you look at the ratings, how come this company has a great ESG rating? Because also, if you can really have a product that is toxic or addictive, but you manage well your ESG in terms of risk, then you're going to have a good rating. And that's how it is working right now. So, and also there's a weighting system, for example, and we have those questions. What happens if you know that you're using child labor in your supply chain, but the rest of what you're doing is really well? What do you do? And still you can have a good ESG rating. So those are things to look at. Everything, and I'm a believer of that, in the system has a role and has a place, and we are where we are, but it's really important not to get confused. Because as consumers, and Priscilla talked about the micro, as consumers, as investors ourselves, as people that decide where to work, we want to know where we are putting our time, our money, our efforts. Okay, so this perspective for me is really, really important. And the second part, when we measure performance, impact performance, there are a lot of limitations, right? Data is scarce, it's not perfect, many assessments are subjective. So all of that, to tell you that today we're in a system that kind of, it gives you a pass to some behavior that is not really contributing to the SDGs under the label of alignment to the SDGs. So it's a time where we need to be super aware of that, because more than the alphabet soup, we're really talking about different approaches. So it's not a matter of saying, oh, I pick any and it's going to be fine. No, you really need to understand what is your priority, and based on that, choosing. And in terms of those limitations, I really would like to just leave you with this thinking, right? So if there's one takeaway, the difference between financial materiality, double materiality, enterprise value, value creation, and the different approaches in the market. Number two, if data on performance is limited, what do we do? And there I'm very happy to talk to you about, you know, the impact standards for private equity, for enterprises, for bond issuers, and the joint standards that we have done with OECD for development finance, because this is really about how do you manage your organization, whether you're an investor or an enterprise, to maximize your contribution to the SDGs, even when you don't have perfect data. And it's all really about this double materiality and value creation. But imagine, and I love what Priscilla said, that this is not an add-on, right? This is not the extra. So imagine a world, again, where you go to an MBA course and they teach you how to maximize financials, but also impact on people and planet, because this is just the way, you know, we run our world from now on. So the standards are really about that. They're really management tool more than impact. That's how I see it. It's just telling you when you manage, include impact considerations. So those are the things I would say, and I'm happy to provide more details, and I will send links. But and I'm sorry if I'll give you, I don't know if Priscilla, you want to add, because we were so passionate about this discussion and you had some great points.
Sure. No, I think, I mean, apart from seconding everything you said, maybe just to add one thing that I think it's also very powerful in the standards, that, you know, as you were saying, there are many different approaches that are emerging. And I completely agree with you that some have different ways of looking at sustainability, and it's great that we are so aligned. But even some of those that really mean to do well, I think they are missing a very important piece, which is the external assurance. And I think the standards, we're not there yet, we're working on it, but I think the standards add that piece, which is so important, because many of the even very harmonized approach that we see out there to impact measurement, to impact management, they provide single investors or single companies with guidance, let's say, on how they can measure and maximize their positive impact, but they don't necessarily get that extra layer of external organization coming in and assessing in a very independent way whether how the organization is performing vis-a-vis its peers also. So that's something that I think it's extremely important, and I think not all of the approaches that exist out there have it. And this is, in a way, maybe it's something that in the world in which you work in, for example, Adam and Timothy and so on, of social entrepreneurship, that's something that is sort of crystallized, you know. But in the world of more traditional investors and even of development finance, this is something relatively new. Moving from approaches that are very self-referential to something that puts you out there and forces you to be externally assured for the ways in which your internal processes look, not just for that impact report that you put out once a year, but really for your own processes and benchmark against your peers. I think that's, in a way, a game changer, because if you use that report properly and you are transparent, I think that can really change the way in which we look at companies and investors. And then another thing I wanted to mention is that this misalignment, sometimes we tend to say that, you know, investors and companies themselves are not doing the right thing. But we see, at least from my vantage point, a lot of misalignment also when it comes to regulation. Because in Europe, for example, they really embraced this, this double materiality or dynamic materiality concept. So if you look at the environmental taxonomy and the upcoming social taxonomy, they really look at materiality, not just financial materiality, but really at the positive impact you can have on people and the planet. But this is not true for regulation in other regions of the world. And this can create a lot of confusion for investors and for companies that are multinational and work across different markets. So I think that's also an area where we will need to do a lot of work collectively to sort of try and do our best to align and to harmonize the ways in which we look at these issues, because otherwise regulators will contribute just to adding confusion to the market. And maybe just one very last point. Another thing that I really think I really like about the standard is that when it comes to, as Belisa was saying, to data availability and the issue with data, a lot of what we say is around, fine, nobody has perfect data, but you can indeed improve your processes, but you can also be very transparent about what data you have, what you don't have, what extra would you need, and if you haven't collected that extra data, why didn't you do it? You know, the limitations. And sometimes even just being transparent about this issue, at least in the world where I work, which is a world where you have to combine the needs of donors and the public sector with the needs of investors and the private sector, that transparency can improve dialogue. And that's incredibly powerful because it allows to move forward, you know, and also to see where the data gaps are and potentially also finance the data collection that would fill those gaps, which is something that is today so important. And I'll stop there, but thank you.
Thank you. I think it's great to hear. I think SVI and others have been saying, you know, this will be the year of assurance. We've probably been saying it for at least 8 years. So maybe we can finally say this is the year of assurance. And the work that is happening around the standards and the development of, you know, an assurance service around it. So that, you know, you want to make claims about SDGs, you want to make claims about maximizing impact, great, prove it. You know, that is absolutely for us a complete game changer. So it is absolutely fantastic to see. You both sort of answered my next question, where I was going to say, you know, I do worry sometimes, and I think it's right to address this concern that, you know, we've got all of these terrifying agendas that we have to address. You know, these are, I wrote some statistics down earlier from the 21 report, you know, an extra 120 million people pushed back into poverty, COVID wiping out 20 years of gains in education. So, you know, what's the message, I guess, you know, a quick sort of message to an enterprise or investor of any size? You know, how do we not make them so terrified? You know, what is that message that says, you can do this? Priscilla, do you have a sort of, you know, a quick elevator pitch that gets people on board?
Yeah, I think, you know, again, what's revolutionary about the standards is that they can apply even to the smallest organizations. So get started, I think, would be my message very simply. But just really, I think it's about starting and getting everyone around the table. And again, I think this is something SVI has been saying for many, many years around, you know, engaging the stakeholders in developing your impact strategy, for example. But it's really sometimes as simple as that, just starting to look at your processes and look at the standards and trying to see, what am I doing right? What can I improve? And really, I think at the level of SDGs, sometimes, and I completely agree, they seem very abstract and seem very far away, but this is normal because they have really been developed for governments. So they're really a tool to help governments see where the gaps are and to track the progress of governments towards sustainable development for their people. So I think we are at the stage now, I mean, 6 years after they have been designed, we have all understood that there is a difference between what an investor can do and what a government can do, and that the SDGs really have to be taken as a signal of where the real issues are. And, you know, once you have an understanding of where the issues are, it's what matters most is really look inside yourself and start to rethink your processes in terms of what impact they can have. And honestly, again, this is something that, and we see it a lot, it's not just for the organization, but it's also for all its shareholders, because they are not just the stakeholders, of course, but really the shareholders, because if we don't involve also the shareholders in this process, I am afraid that any change that we try to make at organizational level might be blown away then by shareholders who haven't understood the importance of what is being done. So that's from my side. I don't know, Belisa, if you have anything else, a better elevator speech, maybe shorter.
No, you make it difficult, but I would try. I think it's more a personal reflection. I really feel that these are critical times for humanity. We really need to look at the big picture, right? As who we are as humanity and where we're at. And this is a transition, right? We're not there yet. We had a system that took us to amazing progress, but also to the crisis of our planet, social and environmental. So we have the power to do a lot, either way, positive or negative. But we're in transition and the system is changing. And all of us, we're 71 people today here. So that's a lot, more than 10 years ago, probably more than 5 years ago. So maybe my reflection would be, and we were talking about this, and that's how I talk to my kids when I change jobs. I change my job to really try to have more impact. And my son will tell me, but Belisa, Mom, do you really think you're gonna just move the needle? Maybe you will have 0.0001% of effect on whatever fighting climate change, right? And he made me think, and then I responded, well, but it's 100% of my life. So this is really important because those are critical times in a macro perspective. But the real question is not about whether we're going to achieve the change, because we will, but will we on time? I don't know. We're not moving fast enough, and the numbers are saying that. But that's not the real question. The real question is that each of us, the 71 of us, what are we doing with the impact we can have as individuals, given our outreach, given the power we have to influence, to act? And that you can have 100% of yourself dedicated to contributing positively. And those that will do that in transition, and we can look back in history, those are the beginners, those that move the change towards something better, towards an evolution of what we're going to be, how we're going to live in the future. So to me, really, I don't know if it's an elevator pitch, but I would say easy? No, it's not going to be easy, right? This is transition. This is difficult. This is complex. Is it necessary? It is necessary. And it's going to define the humanity we want to build. And today, all of us have the power to do something about it. And then I see myself as a farmer. We will plant the seeds. And then one day, we'll see the desired change. We hope it's sometime, we hope, but you see, it's hard. But still, if we want to achieve it, we need to move, and we need to move now with everything we have. And work really hard and with a smile and let go of the outcome. And just, to me, it's about giving it all. And something that's, maybe just to close with this, when we talk about impact, it's economic, environmental, and social, right? We know those three variables are very important. So there was one question about how do I talk to investors, that we care about the three variables, but the three, not one of them, not the economic only, but we care about the economic. So I will just leave you with that. Thank you, Priscilla and Adam.
Thank you so much. I particularly like the idea that we have to do this, this relentless drive to do it with a smile on our face as well. I like that. I will turn now to our audience. There have been some amazing questions and statements coming in. I'm going to first turn to Federico. I believe you have a question for our panelists, if that's okay to you, Federico.
Yes, thanks, Adam. So I think it touches on the question that Belisa mentioned on the investors, on how to educate, or rather how to address investors. And it ties to what Priscilla says in the very beginning on aligning the different actors and organizations on what the SDGs actually mean. And my question is, because my question specifically is, how do you explain, or how do you show that the point of sustainable investment is not uniquely a financial return or environmental positive impact tied to a positive financial return or return on investment, but rather an investment in society, and so tied to all the risks that an investment has. If a sustainable investment has no financial positive return, but has a positive environmental impact or a positive impact on mental health or things like that, it's not to be turned down, and it's still to be considered a successful investment. How do you achieve that? How can you penetrate the minds of investors in that sense? And do you agree with my position on that?
Do you want me to go first, Belisa? I see you're not unmuting. Okay. Thank you so much. I think your question is super relevant. And I mean, it depends really on what kind of investor, I guess, you're talking to, because different investors will have different fiduciary duties. And that, of course, puts them in a different position vis-a-vis the risk that they can actually take. So that would be sort of a first consideration. And that's why I think that also blended finance is such a powerful instrument, because there is sometimes this issue of financial risk, which can't be sort of forgotten, let's say, unfortunately. So that's, for me, a very first issue. But then I think, you know, there are a number of experiences that show how certain investors that have the possibility to start looking at this are being more open-minded about the importance of the positive social impact on the side of the financial return. And I think the examples with the payment by results finance, what social impact bonds have been achieving, they basically have taught the governments that, you know, there is not just financial returns, but there is also social impact, and that certain social issues can be tackled by the private sector. So there are a lot of lessons we can learn there from the ways in which let's say the private sector has been talking to governments. In the same way, I think we can talk to investors and make them see what kind of powerful things or enterprises that have impact can do. But another issue, I think that it's a problem of misperception, because honestly, in certain contexts, I don't think that companies that are achieving superior impact, positive impact, are actually much more risky than the ones that are not. And when I look at development specifically, the more I look into it, the more I see, and development finance institutions have been saying this for a couple of years, that companies that integrate impact consideration, ESG or other ways of looking at impact are future proof. Basically, they are capable of resisting much more to shocks. And I'm not talking about ESG investing now. I'm talking about integrating in the company environmental, social, and governance elements of good environmental, social, and governance management. You can really see that these companies down the line perform better. And the International Finance Corporation has developed the performance standards. I don't know, I think it was 2002 probably, or something like that. I mean, they've been around for many, many years. And these performance standards basically are ESG standards for companies. So they invest in companies that sometimes don't necessarily have the best profile in terms of environmental, social, and governance issues. And they bring them to a state where they are best in class or much better. And why do they do it? Not just because they care about development, but also because they care about the sustainability of their financial returns. So they know that if they don't have companies that are sustainable in the future, those risks that might now look not very material will potentially become material in 5-10 years time, and they will cause issues. So I think if you look at, again, regulation 5 years ago, regulation now, companies that could be in business 5 years ago, I'm not sure they were still in business now or could be in business in 5 years. So I think there is a very strong link also that you can make between these two issues. And I think the whole point, and Belisa made it also earlier, is that integrating these considerations, it's something that is not something just nice that you do, but it's something that can really future-proof your company, not just in terms of financial returns, but also in terms of surviving, let's say. And one last thing I wanted to mention, there is this also misconception about the fact that venture capital can produce unicorns that go to 12% returns, and then, you know, impact companies, yeah, you have unicorns, but maybe they go to 2%. If you look at the returns of venture capital markets in the last 2 years, even pre-pandemic, we were not at the level of 12%. We were more at the same averages, 1%, 2%, 3%. So, I mean, it's not like venture capital gives you so much higher returns than traditional, than impact investing or investing in sustainable companies. On top of that, the unicorns, if you look at them now, are the ones that are most subject to criticism. The Uber that is not treating its worker rights, the Deliveroo, I don't know, all these kind of unicorns. So are they really future-proof, or will they need to change their business model to remain unicorns? So I think this kind of considerations is something that can push investors to think, okay, maybe this whole issue of impact is not just this hippie world that, you know, this little niche of hippies that want to do something because they're good people. There is something much more substantial to that. So I don't know, Belisa, if you want to add something. And sorry, I spoke for a very long time again.
Oh, that was excellent, Priscilla. And just to tell you, one key driver that's going to come is the millennials as a demand, as a powerful consumption. Consumption is going to change, and the consumers' awareness is changing. Regulation is changing. So it's a little bit forward looking, right? We are going towards a world where these things matter more and more for society. And as the climate crisis is going to get worse, this is going to increase. So it's really a matter of being strategic and forward looking. So that's one very important variable. The other, I wanted to tell you, Federico, that it's evidence. There is not tons of evidence yet, right? So what I would do if I had to talk to first of all, if the investor, and this is my personal opinion, Federico, you're talking to an investor that really doesn't care, and it's a changing mindset. Maybe you won't convince it right now. And that's really a question of who's your audience. And what I try to focus my work on is those that are doubting but are interested, or those that want to do it and they don't know how, because those will drive the change to then bring along the others. So this is the time to be really strategic about where we put our efforts. So imagine that we spend, those that were trying to do it, we're still figuring it out. And this is the truth because it's new, right? So there is a lot of demand for those that want to do the transformation, a lot of demand for those that are unsure. Are we really going to spend time with those that we won't convince? I wouldn't right now, right? So I'm not sure what's your situation, but this is also a consideration. We have little time, little resources. Okay, we're not the majority yet, right? We're all, so how do we optimize and maximize our impact? And we will do that by being strategic of where we put our efforts. But this is coming, and just to add on, because I agree with everything that Priscilla said. So there's lots of evidence. This is about long-term sustainability, but they can tell you, oh, fine, then I manage it as risk, right? And this is beyond. And the science is there. So the facts are going to come and the interest is going to increase. But I would really, in few words, I would pick my battles, Federico, and look for influencing. And even, you're laughing, if I cannot convince the boss, a pilot, let me prove it to you. Like a research, like R&D, let me prove it to you that I find an investment that also has impact and return. That's another way of convincing by evidence. That's all. Thank you, Priscilla and Adam and Federico, for a great question. It could be a long conversation, actually.
I think that's always going to be the challenge with such a topic and 60 minutes. There are requests to see if our panelists today would be happy to share their contact details. So I'll leave it to the panelists, and we will, of course, communicate with all attendees today. So we'll share those as appropriate. Some great questions. Thank you so much to everybody. I think I'm just going to ask a final question before I summarize things, and it's just a sort of, almost a scale of 1 to 5. Priscilla, Melissa, how confident are you that we're going to get there? This is my summary question. 5 is, yep, certainly. 1 is, I've just read the 2021 report and I'm feeling a bit down about things. Priscilla.
Okay, it depends on what we mean by there. No, I studied economics, so they taught me that the best answer is always it depends. But anyway, I think that we are in a scale from 1 to 10, probably due to the pandemic and other external shocks, at a 5. But no, I think that every crisis is an opportunity in a way. So we have really the opportunity to turn this into the game changer. Even if we can't meet the SDGs the way we're written, what really makes me, I'm always a pessimist, but what makes me a little bit of an optimist in this case is that I really see that things are starting to move, that this topic is high on the agenda. I mean, Adam, we've known each other for many years, and when I started working on these issues, I felt like we were really a niche of IPs. I mean, we were I was working for a small association, and we had few members, and within those, only few were interested in these issues of impact. So now it's everywhere. I feel it's difficult to follow everything that is happening. So in a way, I think that, the positive thing is that there is change, there is movement. And I completely agree with Melissa that it's still something that we need to accelerate, because otherwise we will not be able to, apart from achieving the SDGs, we will not be able to live the world in a sort of in a shape that our children and grandchildren and future generation will be able to survive. So I think that's my only sort of reason why I'm not that optimistic, is the pace at which we're going. But the fact that this is moving and the pace is increasing, that's to me a very positive thing.
Thank you. Melissa, 1 to 5, it was changed to 1 to 10.
Oh, you changed it to 1 to 10? Well, I believe in humanity. We will make it, that's a 5. but I don't think we will make it on time. Okay, and so to make it, because I'm an economist too, so you need a timeline for every goal. So we will make it, yes. As humanity, we will. We will make it on time right now. At the pace we're going, no. But the way we need to take this statistic is a motivation. At the pace, no. What does that mean? That we need to move faster. That this is urgent, right? And that's what I want to leave you with. That yes, it's not enough. And then what can we do about it to maybe get there and accelerate? So I refuse pessimism, although I'm not an optimistic. Let's have this report to encourage us to move faster and really believe that it doesn't matter the outcome. This is 100% of our lives. What are we going to do with it? And I'm saying, try to accelerate this rhythm because we're running out of time.
Thank you so much. I'm sure everybody will agree and share their thanks with our panelists today. We've heard such great ideas, you know, and I end today by reminding ourselves that, you know, the SDGs are more important than ever. Now is the time to secure the well-being of people, economies, societies, and our planet. We've heard so much about the need to do things different. Are we doing the right things and are we doing them well? Well, this is where I would say we can support you on that journey, and have a look at the Efiko website. We have a number of training options coming up. We have autonomous learning options for those of you still wanting to learn and develop your skills over the summer. And in September, we will have a cohort-based social learner program available to all. Again, a massive, massive thank you today to our panelists and to everybody who's joined us. So again, wherever you are around the world, stay safe, enjoy the summer holidays, and yeah, let's grasp the nettle that has been laid down by our panelists today. Let's do things more quickly at the scale and the pace that is required to have that humanity, to leave the planet in a state that is fit for ourselves and the next generations. So thank you once again from the organizations presenting today. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you to everybody for joining us. Stay safe and see you well. See you for the next one. Thank you very much, everybody.